David, thanks. Neenah Police tonight gave an update on the department's partnership with Flock Safety at a Public Services and Safety Committee meeting. It comes amid a push by some people who want city officials to terminate its contract with the surveillance company. News 10 Drew Best shares more details about tonight's conversation. Drew.
Yeah, Jason, flock cameras continue to be a hot topic. The debate growing even more in Neenah after both Oshkosh and Appleton chose to rescind its flock contracts with Flock Safety. In Oshkosh's case, the recommendation came after what officials initially deemed to be an untrue statement about Flock's heat mapping capabilities. Neenah's police chief, Aaron Olson, shared his conversation with Oshkosh's police chief after that vote, which received a vocal reaction from meeting attendees.
Ed is confident that there was a misunderstanding to the question and not a lie. And I got a long explanation. I'm just telling you guys what I'm being told, okay?
Those same community members expressed their concerns to a committee about data security and allegations over misuses of the system by officials.
I need to feel safe in my community, and I need to feel safe here. And as long as there are flock cameras that track my every move, I don't feel safe.
At its core, this is about not wanting our daily movements added to a national surveillance network that can be accessed by people we don't know in places we've never been for purposes we have no control over, with really endless possibilities for its use.
We're told a Flock Safety representative was supposed to attend this meeting, but canceled last minute, according to Chief Olson. He defended flock cameras, saying Neenah Police has used it to arrest many violent criminals. I also spoke with Mayor Brian Borchert, who heard these concerns from both sides, but does not want to make a knee-jerk decision without doing more research.
It's an emotional topic, and there are oftentimes people that will use facts in their own way, and vice versa. So we're going to take this process slow to make sure that the safety of Neenah is still relevant, and making sure that the people that are concerned are going to be heard, and we're going to find out if those are true.
There were no decisions made on the status of Flock Safety's partnership with Neenah tonight, and as of now, the city remains under contract with Flock through fall of 2028. Chief Olson said he'd be willing to explore other companies at that time if necessary. They expect to have a Flock Safety representative at the next committee meeting in 2 weeks. Jason.